Well, still no official claim of responsibility, but just over an hour ago, Algeria's Interior Minister said he had no doubt that al-Qaeda's North Africa wing was behind Tuesday's deadly attack in Algiers. 2 car bombs exploded within minutes of each other in the busy streets of upmarket districts of the capital. One target was the country's Supreme Constitutional Court, the second device exploding close to UN refugee offices. The United Nations says its building was deliberately targeted and that 4 members of its staff were killed. Well, health officials say 67 people died in the blasts. We'll have more on al-Qaeda's deadly operations in North Africa in a moment. But first, this report from Hashim Akhalbara.
Algiers rocked once again by explosions. 2 bombs blasted in 2 neighborhoods of the capital, creating chaos and carnage. One exploded near a police station and the country's Supreme Court, and the other near buildings belonging to the United Nations and the International Red Cross.
Apparently it was a car bomb that exploded about 9:30 this morning on a street, a residential street that runs between 2 UN buildings. On one side of the street is the main UN headquarters in Algiers, and on the other side of the street, just down the street a bit, is the UNHCR office. Both buildings took extensive damage.
This is just unacceptable, and this is, I'd like to condemn in the strongest terms. This is just unacceptable in whatever circumstances. It cannot be justified in any circumstances.
University students in a bus heading for a law faculty were also killed.
What we do know for certain is that these were car bombs. Here at the International Red Cross and Red Crescent location, it seems it was a car driven by a suicide bomber.
Hospital sources said several foreigners were among those seriously injured. The death toll expected to climb, with many bodies feared trapped under the rubble. While no group has claimed responsibility for the explosions, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb has said it was behind similar attacks in the last 2 years, including this one last April near the Prime Minister's offices. The breakaway group has rejected the president's offer for an amnesty in exchange for laying down its arms. Tuesday's attacks, a sign the army's major offensive to clamp down on the radical group, has failed to restore security. Hashim Akhalbara, Al-Jazeera.
Al-Jazeera's Interior Minister says he believes the attacks were carried out by al-Qaeda's wing in North Africa and admitted authorities knew that such attacks were being planned.
We know for sure it's the GSPC. That's because after the April attack, the security services arrested much of the network's membership, and we knew then that buildings like the Constitutional Court were among their targets.
So fingers are being pointed at a group known as al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Let's take a look at how that group's evolved. Algeria's armed Islamic group, also known as GIA, began attacking the government in 1992 after it cancelled elections that an Islamic party looked set to win. Some 150,000 people died in the ensuing decade-long civil war. Unhappy with the brutal tactics of the GIA, a splinter group broke away in 1998, calling itself the Salafist Group for Preaching and Combat, or the GSPC. By the summer of 2006, sustained pressure by the Algerian security forces had the group confined to mountains east of the capital. But just a few months later, the GSPC aligned itself with al-Qaeda, joining Osama bin Laden's global network. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb was officially created in 2007, January, with leader Abu Musab Abdel Wadud promising a high-profile campaign of violence. There have been a series of deadly bombings in Algeria and Morocco since then. One of the worst, the April the 11th blasts that killed 33 people in Algiers. Well, Mohammed Ben Madani's a North Africa analyst, joins me now from our London studio. So many people seem to be saying it is this group aligned to al-Qaeda. Do you have any doubt?
Absolutely. This is a well-organized and planned attack by al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't issue a communique either tonight or tomorrow claiming the responsibility. I think this attack, which took place in a highly secured area, which houses the diplomatic representative in Algiers and also Minister of Economy, is well planned, well executed, and I think the Algerian security forces should be called to account.
I was just going to ask you that point. The Interior Minister saying they knew such attacks were planned. What does that say about the effectiveness of those who carried out the bombings and equally the ineffectiveness of those whose job it is to prevent them?
Well, frankly, the al-qaeda in the Maghreb has infiltrated the Algerian security forces for many years now, and everyone knows it. And also to carry out this attack, as well as the one last April you have referred to, which destroyed the Prime Minister's office, needs a highly planning and highly sophisticated planning. So either the Algerian security forces are part of it, or if they are not, then why not? Why they haven't prevented it?
Our reporter referred to the fact that the president had offered this group an amnesty in return for it laying down its arms. Was that ever a realistic proposition?
Well, frankly, the 24 or 5 who have it surrounded since the beginning of this year are still now in jail, and they have not been really granted an amnesty. So that is not very encouraging for the promises the president has made. And frankly, if the Algerian president wants a settlement in this issue, he has to set up a sort of a reconciliation committee similar to South Africa, find a commission.
And yet at the same time, he's also, within the last month, launched a campaign to try to rid Algeria of extremist movements, particularly in the mosques, he says.
Well, frankly, this is nonsense, because the number of al-Qaeda in the Maghreb runs into 1,400. So they are not short of numbers. They have highly infiltrated the services, as well as have support within the population as well. So that is basically nonsense. Either he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he ignores it.
Thanks for your analysis. Mohammed Ben Madani talking to us from London. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is demanding that Israel end an incursion into the Gaza Strip that's already killed at least 4 fighters. Our correspondent, Ayman Mohideen, is on the Israeli side of the Sufa crossing into southern Gaza. He sent this report.
This is an Israeli airstrike on a building in Gaza, and this is the aftermath from the ground. Backed by air support, dozens of Israeli tanks and armored vehicles rolled into the southern Gaza Strip to, quote, dismantle the infrastructure of groups behind homemade rocket attacks into southern Israel. The Israeli military is calling it a routine operation, but for Palestinian victims, it is anything but routine. 4 Palestinians were killed in Israeli attacks throughout the day. The Israeli military says 4 soldiers were slightly wounded by an anti-tank mine during ground operations. The latest violence comes on the eve of renewed low-level talks between Israelis and Palestinians meant to jumpstart peace negotiations. Since the Annapolis conference, 40 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip alone. About 120 or so rockets have been fired into southern Israel, highlighting a common reality that the political intentions of the talks is not often met with concrete actions on the ground. Ayman Mohideen, Al Jazeera, Sufa.
The Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad says a new round of sanctions against his country over its nuclear program would have no legal basis. The president was speaking following a new US intelligence review that concluded that Iran stopped developing its atomic weapons program 4 years ago. His comments come as Britain, the US, Russia, China, France and Germany are due to discuss new penalties against Iran. On Tuesday, George Bush repeated his belief that Iran does pose a danger to global security. And the US ambassador to the International Atomic Agency told Al Jazeera that there's still a threat from Iran's nuclear program.
First off, we assessed that Iran had a nuclear weapons program until 4 years ago. This was not a hobby shop activity. This was a program conducted by the military under the direction of the leadership. Iran was violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty in doing this. Iran has not admitted this to the IAEA.